look, the subsidy is a really important point because we spend $11 billion a year subsidising fossil fuels. And the minister's just said, $1 billion a year fix the environment. Well, money doesn't grow on trees, you know. Hi, welcome to Spin Bin. I'm Richard Dennis.
I'm Polly Hemming.
And here at Spin Bin, what we like to do is break down what the politicians are really trying to say. Break down the spin, break down the weasel words, slow down the play. Just like when you're watching the football where they hit pause, we're going to hit pause and try and explain what they're really saying. Because politicians are clever people. They choose their words carefully and sometimes you might miss what they're really up to if we go through at full speed.
So it's been a while.
Way too long.
We took a little bit of a break from Spin Bin. Unfortunately, the spin didn't take a break.
And still plenty around.
We've been called back to duty.
Oh, we've been hauled back into duty today.
And this episode, Richard, is about the environment, isn't it? Because there's a few things being said about the environment.
Didn't we fix that?
Yeah, I hear it's sorted. Oh. It's fine. It's all taken care of.
No.
So recently, Minister for the Environment and Water, Tanya Plibersek, launched the State of the Environment report, the long-awaited State of the Environment report.
The one the previous government maybe hid a bit under the mattress, under the rug, nothing to see here.
Just for context, the State of the Environment report is this kind of an assessment that comes out every few years, just showing how the environment's tracking, like how it's all looking. Well, we don't know. We're yet to watch the video. So the minister launched the report. And then she talked about how we're going to fix any problems that may or may not
be contained wherein
in our collapsing ecosystems.
It's right there on page 1 of the report. I quote, "Overall, the state and trend of the environment in Australia are poor and deteriorating." So
Australia's ecosystems are collapsing. That's the take-home message there.
I picked that up.
Yeah, things are really bad. They're collapsing thanks to climate change, land clearing, threatened species, there's
excessive extraction of water out of rivers, complete contempt when
mining,
it comes to the planning process.
Pollution.
But other than that,
there's a few drivers. So in this address, she says, so over the last 5 years, this has all intensified. That's true that it did intensify, but to be clear, this is it's like climate change or like Pantene. It didn't happen overnight. This is like decades of systemic underfunding, continuing to fund damaging industries. And
under-regulating the harmful industries. We don't have to pay money to fix everything. We can stop people doing bad things, and we haven't. And we haven't invested in people doing good things.
Yeah, but the point is, if you go and listen to this whole address, it's sort of like, well, the previous government caused this to happen. And, it caused a lot, it drove a lot of damage, but this is, literally decades worth of underfunding and damaging industries in Australia, isn't it?
Yeah, and, not just in Australia, obviously these are worldwide problems, but in Australia we do have unique habitats, we do have unique problems, and you'd think we'd care about something like bleaching the Great Barrier Reef, but last 5 years, clearly not. But as you said, that's been going on for decades.
Yeah, and we've been warned for decades as well, so the Barrier Reef is not a new
those
thing.
Scientists, they're always showing off with their back catalogue, aren't they?
Didn't happen overnight. There's been...
I told you so!
Yeah, a lot of things to indicate that this is happening.
Boring they are,
it's not a surprise. None of this should be a surprise to anyone, basically. Coming out and saying this is all bad and it was because of the coalition is pretty inadequate, I think.
But, there's a happy ending coming, surely.
We'll see. I don't know. I'm sure everyone knows, but the environment is what keeps us alive, right? So it's fairly important. We've just been given this pretty grim state of affairs around the literal life support systems of our country.
I'm still waiting for the good news.
Yeah, okay, I'm just setting the scene. So surely the government wants to do something about it.
To protect the ecosystem that our entire society depends on.
20 minutes of how bad this is, what are they going to do?
Here we go.
The State of the Environment report also makes it clear that we have to do a better job of repairing environmental damage.
Cool.
Too much clearing of habitat has already occurred.
Yep.
Too many ecosystems and species are under threat. We can't just stop future destruction, although this is essential and the most cost-effective way.
Can't we? We can't just stop future destruction?
No, there's money to be made.
Oh.
But I think the point she's making is it's not enough to stop. We have to repair.
Oh, that sounds great. She wants to stop future destruction.
Yeah, do you think that's a commitment right there?
Hope so.
They're going to stop future destruction?
Seems like step one.
Seems like no new gas and coal.
Stop doing harm.
Statement.
Old school. Oh, well, let's see where she goes next.
To address the environmental crisis, we also need to actively repair past damage. The Australian Land Conservation Alliance estimates that we need to spend over $1 billion a year to restore and prevent further landscape degradation.
Is that all?
Yeah, I've seen other estimates.
But $1 billion's nothing.
No, $1 billion's nothing.
Billion's nothing.
Even if it was double that, which some are, even if it was $16 billion in a year.
Only an economist can say this.
Yeah.
$2 billion is nothing.
Yeah.
Like, just to put it into perspective, Australia's GDP, gross domestic product, closer to $3 trillion, $3,000 billion. So $2 billion, that's rounding error. You know, we spend $50 billion defending ourselves each year. Apparently $1 billion, this is a bargain. This is all good news. We've got the good news.
Yeah, and she's going to say, and no worries.
We're about to spend it.
We're going to sign off on that.
Oh, this is better news than I thought.
The scale of this challenge means that governments can't do it alone.
So...
Oh, dear. Who does she think needs the help?
So the government is kind of the one that let it get wrecked,
Yep.
but can't afford to clean it up now that has happened.
So just to give you some perspective here, remember we were only going to have diesel submarines and they were only going to cost $100 billion? And then someone decided, nah, we need much better ones than that. And then we went and bought $250 billion submarines. And when the Treasurer was asked about this, Josh Frydenberg, the former Treasurer, said, well, if it's a priority, you just got to spend the money.
You just got to spend the money.
$250 billion. So I don't know what it means to suggest that the government can't afford $1 or $2 billion, because don't get me wrong, if I had $1 billion, I could buy a lot of cool stuff. But there's 25 million Australians. Again, you couldn't find $1 billion in the national accounts. It's rounding error. So
who do you reckon is going to be the ones to do this? Like cafe owners? Are they going to be?
Maybe the cafe owners. Maybe we're all going to donate a few bucks.
Who's going to be doing this?
We need to work with industry and with philanthropic partners, many of whom are...
Hang on. Would that be the industry that caused all the damage?
I don't know. It's such a vague... vague reference.
So, like, when we think about economics, unfortunately, we often think about money, but there's so many ways that we can design policy. And the obvious one is regulation. Like, we regulate all sorts of activities. We regulate what side of the road you can drive on. We regulate how loud you can play your music at midnight. We regulate all sorts of things. We just do a really crap job of regulating to prevent mass land clearing. We do a really crap job of stopping new mines getting built in precious Indigenous sites. We do a really crap job of stopping mining companies blow up Yukon Gorge. Not accidentally, because they liked the value of the iron ore more than they liked the value of the Indigenous heritage. So step one, the idea that we need industry, we couldn't tackle this without them. Let's be clear, they caused it, and lax regulation let them cause it. And yeah, you bet government can spend money to fix things up. I'm not opposed to that at all, but the amounts of money we're talking about are trivial.
Yeah, lax regulation and also subsidising these harmful industries too, like subsidising native logging, subsidising mining. And going back to the regulation, I think in New South Wales, the highest fine the Environmental Protection Authority can issue is $15,000.
Wow.
I mean, that's nothing.
You get fined more than that for protesting to protect the climate.
Yeah, which is another conversation, but by design.
Well, and look, the subsidy is a really important point, because we spend $11 billion a year subsidising fossil fuels. And the minister's just said, $1 billion a year fix the environment. Well, money doesn't grow on trees, you know. Well, here's a tip. Stop subsidising the things that are doing all the harm, and you could spend $1 billion on and have $10 billion in lazy change.
Yeah.
So, you know, leaving aside that we're not going to regulate, we're not going to scrap the subsidies, and apparently we can't afford to spend a few $1 billion on something as important as our entire ecosystem. Leaving all the good ideas aside, what on earth is she talking about, this investment stuff?
Yeah, so she came out and she said in another speech, I'm going to read it because we don't have video. She says, maybe one day Australia will house its own Green Wall Street, a trusted global financial hub where the world comes to invest in environmental protection and restoration. So the idea is that the private sector's been lined up as the biggest investor in the Australian environment, in nature. So
Private sector.
the private sector, yeah. Their motivation
Frog
to do
futures.
this, not quite sure. Yep, the
Dingo
idea,
derivatives.
I think, is that if another country has destroyed a bit of its own environment, it just buys a bit of ours.
Oh, well, before we get into that, did she actually say a trusted place like Wall Street?
Didn't the Wall Street crash cause the Great Depression?
Yeah,
Like
and the GFC.
it's not a happily ever after story. If I was trying to give a compelling sales pitch, Wall Street wouldn't be my go-to.
Yeah, wow.
So yes, she did. She said Australia's going to be like this stock exchange where we have markets for nature, carbon, all sorts of things, and we can just like sell our
Right.
quolls or bogey
Quokkas.
moths or
What's the exchange rate?
alpine.
Platypus to a quokka. That'd be interesting. We'll have to ask the market.
Yeah, I don't know.
No one does.
Don't know.
We'll
what it
find out
is.
soon enough.
What's your bogong index like?
Forget the hung sing.
yeah.
We've got the hung possum. So let's go back a bit here. Like, I get, what Wall Street is. I get people buy and sell shares in BHP because, for example, BHP makes a profit, and if I own a share in that company, I get a share in the profit. Why would anyone want to invest money, not donate, they're saying invest. Why would anyone want to invest money in possums or koala habitat? What's the return? What do they get back? Because an investment isn't a gift. An investment
exactly.
generates a return. So if I bought some possum habitat, what do I get?
It's a really good question. No one actually knows. The government keeps suggesting that there's this massive wall of investment waiting to invest in koalas, waiting to invest in quokkas or whatever. Of course, the private sector is not going to be investing just out of the goodness of their heart. They want a return, and a return of probably about 8 to 20% within the first year. So yeah, to answer your question, the only way that this could possibly work as a market is if these commodities, these units that are being traded,
so a hectare of possum habitat or a hectare of koala habitat, that's my commodity.
It's being used to offset a loss somewhere else.
Right, so if I can make millions of bucks building property development on some koala habitat here, I'm allowed to destroy some koala habitat here, so I can make a lot of money selling houses if I buy another unit of koala-ness over there somewhere.
Yeah, and you just, that theoretically cancels out the damage that you've done here. Similar to the concept of carbon credit. That's the only conceivable way that the private sector would be willing to invest if there's some sort of return. But regardless of all this, like, we could kind of go into the fact that we're going to be like trading corroboree frogs or whatever. But the point I really wanted to drive home is that it's just manifestly untrue that government cannot afford to do this. Like, we can talk about this market and how it would work, but really the take-home message is we actually don't even need to get involved in that conversation, because it is simply not true that the government cannot afford to restore and conserve the environment on its own.
And they could actually just say, no, you can't knock down this koala habitat over here. And if you don't knock it down, you won't need to offset anything.
Yeah.
So we've kind of got misleading claim number one, that, the offsets are necessary. But misleading claim number two is, well, if you didn't let them do it, there wouldn't be anything to offset.
Yeah.
Green Wall Street or green wash?
Yeah, it's a bit of both, really. There's something else that Tanya says in her speech when she was pitching Green Wall Street in Bali. And I wanted to check it with you because this feels like spin to me, but I'm not an economist. You are. Okay, so she said economics has always been about what we choose to value. Traditionally, we've valued many activities that degrade our environment. Can you tell me what that means?
No, it means nothing. So economics is the science of the efficient allocation of scarce resources. So economists think that all resources are valuable. Politicians, our elected representatives, they cook up rules that sort of restrict access to some things. Like, I can't just go out and stake a claim and say, I own this land. We've got all these property rights to say who can and can't do that. But we don't make rules for some things. That's why we let carbon dioxide go into the atmosphere, because our politicians haven't got around to making a rule that says you're not allowed to. So it's not that economics doesn't value the environment. It's decades of politicians who keep saying, yeah, you can clear that. You can knock it down. There's no rule says you can't. So, yeah, sorry to sound defensive of economists, but it's not economics that says frogs aren't worth something, koalas aren't worth something, and an ecosystem's not worth something. That's not economics. We know it's worth a lot, but we don't have laws in Australia that make us treat destroying the barrier reef, which we're allowed to do, the same as if I come and destroy your car or house, then I'm going to jail. So that's not economics, so that's the rules.
It's probably more reasonable to say, or more accurate to say, that it's not economics who valued harmful industries, it's governments who have chosen to value harmful industries and have chosen, I would argue, are still choosing not to value the environment because they're not investing the money in it. They are saying someone else is going to have to do this. We're going to keep subsidising fossil fuels. We are not going to regulate land clearing adequately. We are going to keep subsidising, in the case of state governments, native forest clearing. To me, that says they're not necessarily, they're not valuing.
No, it's worse than that. It's always worse than that when I'm around. It's worse than that because the reason that we haven't put in rules to protect native forest, the reason that we haven't put in rules to protect the barrier reef, the reason we haven't put in rules to protect Indigenous heritage is that the companies that we're now being told are going to fix it have lobbied against those rules for decades. So it's not like we just accidentally forgot to regulate to protect the environment or accidentally forgot to regulate to protect Indigenous heritage. The biggest mining companies and the biggest logging companies in Australia have spent a fortune and decades preventing us from protecting these resources, which economists value. And now we're being told, oh, the green wall of capital's coming to fix the problem that they caused. But as you said, the kicker is, oh, I'll protect this bit, but only if you let me destroy this bit. That's not economics.
Okay, I just want to play how the minister, it's quite long, this bit, describes the environment that the government can't afford to save.
A healthy environment sits at the heart of our national legacy and it feeds our national soul. Our sense of ourselves, our health as a society is bound up with the health of our land and our water. Australians know how lucky we are to live in this country. It's the feeling that you get when you're coming home after a time away. You see it with fresh eyes and fresh appreciation. The crystal blue sky, clearer than anywhere else in the world. The glimmer and sparkle of Sydney Harbour.
I'm sorry, that's just... But we're open for business.
And we can't afford to save it.
We can't afford to save it. What she's getting to is that it is integral to us as Australians, as humans. And more pragmatically, as others have said, the environment is kind of the last line of defence against climate change, these resilient ecosystems. Going back to something you were saying about how much we spend on defence, we spend 2% of GDP on defence every year. That was just an arbitrary figure, as I understand it. Like someone just said...
Oh, it's heaps better than 1.9.
It's a bit bigger than 1.9.
And just the right amount smaller than 2.1.
Isn't it? It's higher than that.
Yeah, it's gone up.
Anyway, that's quite a lot of money. I don't know what it is in dollars and cents, but that's a lot, isn't it? How much is 2% of our GDP?
Oh, we spend around 50 billion a year on defence.
Yeah, right. Okay. Pragmatically, the environment is and the climate is a national security issue. Others have said that. That's not me saying that. You know, proper science experts have said that. Why are we not spending the same amount that we spend on guns and submarines that we're never going to use on the environment that is actually keeping us alive every day? And that is literally a national security issue.
Well, and a national treasure, according to the Environment
and all
Minister.
That stuff. Yeah,
and let's just put it all into perspective. $1 billion a year. $1 billion. That's about $40 each.
I earn way more than that.
We've been overpaying you. like, let's put this into perspective. Like, that's $40 a year each. Okay, this is not a lot of money. When we're about to introduce the stage 3 tax cuts, which will give $9,000 a year in tax cuts to people, mainly blokes, earning over 200 grand, and the total cost of the stage 3 tax cuts is submarine-esque, around $250 billion. So just to pretend, for a moment to pretend, that we can afford to give enormous tax cuts to high-income earners, brackets mainly blokes, and that somehow this national beauty that makes us choke up when we talk about it is a bit exy, and, you know, in straitened financial times we might have to go without.
Belt tightening.
To tighten the belt around the koala's neck. You know, it's just ridiculous. And again, it's not economics. And that was a bit nasty to the koala. I wouldn't do that.
This is something you're going to be hearing a lot, like green investment, nature-based solutions, all sound incredibly alluring, but fundamentally we cannot let government off the hook when it says, sorry, we can't afford to do this. Let's start getting the private sector involved in protecting the Australian environment.
Let's get the people who cause the harm and then give them credit, literally credit, for fixing the problem they caused, in part because we're pretending that we couldn't afford to do it. If we put a super profits tax on the gas profits this year, we could fix this for 50 years to come. If we scrap the stage 3 tax cuts, we could fix this for 250 years to come. If we scrap the submarines, we could do it for 250 years to come. So yeah, I think the key spin here is, I really care about the environment. We all do, but I don't have like you, I don't have $1 billion laying around. But I'm not like you. I'm the minister in the Commonwealth government that spends around $500 billion a year. And if we wanted to spend 1/500th of that, according to the minister, we could fix it. And of course, if we stopped the new mines and we stopped the new land clearing, we wouldn't have to tidy up so much mess.
I think more broadly, anytime you hear government saying it can't afford anything, you've written a few books about this, I believe. In fact, I think that's mostly what you write about, isn't it?
And it's obligatory that you mention it. Are you saying I'm repetitive?
That off. It's met my KPI. No, but you've written about this extensively. Government chooses what it wants to spend money on. It is always a choice. So anytime you hear government saying it can't afford, you know, to increase the rate of JobKeeper, it can't afford to
help women fleeing domestic violence.
Yeah, anytime. It's funny how there are all these things that actually help people that they just can't afford to do.
We can't afford to do everything. We can't afford to do anything. We elect members of parliament to make these choices on our behalf. And it's okay for them to say, look, I could spend $1 billion a year protecting our ecosystems, but I'd rather spend $1 billion a year on something else. That's true. But to say can't afford, when what they're really just trying to hide is don't want to, that's where the spin comes in, and that's what the spin bin's for.
Unfortunately, like the Commonwealth government, the Australia Institute can't afford to make these videos alone, and we're inviting your private...
We need your private investment in our Wall Street.
In our Blue Wall Street?
Blue Wall Street. So donate, support, share, and outsource your thinking to us at the Australia Institute.
Because we actually can't afford to do it.